This is True Crime Stories for Sleep. In the early 2000s, Brazil was no stranger to bold robberies. But nothing in its long criminal history compared to what would unfold in August 2005. What began as a small landscaping business operating out of a modest rental property would quietly evolve into one of the largest, smartest, and most meticulously engineered bank heists the world had ever seen. The city of Fortaleza, located in northeastern Brazil, bustled with its usual rhythm: markets, beaches, heavy traffic, and a rising population. But beneath one ordinary neighborhood street, a secret tunnel was slowly cutting through the earth. It was the kind of operation that sounded like fiction, almost laughable in its audacity, yet executed with a level of patience, intelligence, and organization that most criminal groups only dream of achieving. What happened in the summer of 2005 would leave authorities stunned, the public fascinated, and the Banco Central institution scrambling to understand how a crew of ordinary-looking men had managed to slip past every security system without triggering a single alarm. Before we dig into the incredible details of this heist, the planning, the tunnel, the aftermath, this is your chance to become part of this series as it unfolds. If you enjoy deep dive, documentary-style storytelling and want more real-world mysteries, crimes, and unbelievable events, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment so you don't miss the rest of the biggest bank heists ever. Now, let's get into the astonishing true story of how a group of criminals pulled off a heist that still shocks experts nearly 20 years later. The plan began almost 3 months before the robbery when a group of men rented a small white house near the Banco's Central branch. They posed as landscapers, even placing a sign outside reading, "Grama Sintetica, artificial grass." Delivery trucks arrived regularly. Workers carried in tools, lumber, and bags of soil. From the street, the business looked entirely legitimate. Inside, however, the men were digging. Using the equipment they brought in as supplies, they carved a tunnel from the house toward the bank, working in intense heat and poor ventilation. They installed lights, air circulation tubes, and wooden supports to prevent collapse. By the end, the tunnel stretched more than 250 feet, longer than a football field, burrowed 13 feet underground, and built with engineering precision. No one in the neighborhood suspected a thing. The workers came and went, always polite, never drawing attention. It was a perfect disguise. People expect noise from construction or landscaping, not silence from beneath the floorboards. As the tunnel advanced, the operation became even more sophisticated. The criminals reinforced the walls with concrete and wood and even lined sections with plastic to reduce friction when dragging heavy loads later. Every detail was planned. Every inch measured. The gang had studied the bank's blueprints, its vault layout, and the composition of the reinforced floors they would eventually breach. After nearly 3 months of secret labor, their tunnel reached a point directly beneath the bank vault. It was now August 6, 2005. The crew waited until the weekend, knowing that the bank would remain empty until Monday. In the early hours of that Saturday morning, they broke through the vault floor, bypassing every alarm, motion sensor, and security checkpoint. It was a perfect entry, quiet, unseen, and impossible to trace until it was far too late. Once inside, they faced their final challenge: the stacks of 50 real notes, kept inside the vault. The money was unmarked, not yet circulated, and bundled tightly in bricks. The criminals worked methodically, loading the bags and transporting them back through the tunnel. Their exit route was as silent as their entrance. No alarms sounded. No cameras recorded them. Nothing indicated that anything at all was happening beneath the building. By Monday morning, the team had vanished, leaving behind only dust, a hole in the vault floor, and what would soon be discovered as one of the largest cash losses in world history. When bank employees arrived for work that Monday, nothing initially seemed amiss. It wasn't until the vault door was opened that staff realized what had happened. The vault floor was torn open, and vast empty spaces sat where large stacks of cash once stood. Panic erupted. Police arrived. The media descended. And the final count stunned everyone: approximately 164 million reais, equivalent to nearly 70 million US dollars at the time, had been taken. Because the money was not sequentially numbered, tracking it became nearly impossible. In practical terms, it was the perfect crime. The discovery of the house rental confirmed the criminal's clever disguise. Police found the tunnel entrance concealed beneath a removable false floor, along with food containers, water bottles, work tools, and leftover construction materials. Forensic teams descended on the scene, mapping the tunnel's engineering marvel. Experts were baffled at the sophistication, calling it one of the most ambitious underground constructions ever created by a criminal group. It was as if a fully equipped mine shaft had been built right under the noses of unsuspecting neighbors. Over the following months, authorities launched one of the largest manhunts in Brazil's history. Some arrests were eventually made, and portions of the money recovered, but the majority of the cash, well over 100 million reais, was never found. Several suspects were connected to organized crime groups, yet many of the masterminds disappeared or died in violent disputes in the years that followed. The enormous size of the haul created internal conflicts, betrayals, and retaliatory attacks among criminal networks. Money that large rarely comes without bloodshed. To this day, the full list of participants is uncertain. The exact engineering minds behind the tunnel remain unidentified, though police believe professionals, engineers, architects, and skilled construction workers were involved. The tunnel itself was eventually sealed, but photos taken at the time reveal a shocking level of quality, far beyond anything typically associated with heists of that era. This was not improvisation. It was a long-term, carefully executed project designed to avoid confrontation, alarms, and violence. Unlike many heists that rely on guns, intimidation, or chaos, the Banco Central burglary was built on patience, intelligence, and strategy. The event left a lasting mark on Brazil and on global criminal history. Security experts reevaluated how bank vaults are designed, how buildings monitor underground activity, and how front business disguises can hide criminal operations. The heist became a case study in universities, security institutions, and documentary programs across the world. It demonstrated that with the right blend of planning and expertise, even the most secure financial structures can have hidden vulnerabilities, literally beneath their feet. Nearly 2 decades later, the Banco Central burglary still holds its place as one of the most astonishing bank heists ever attempted. It was quiet, clean, and executed with an almost surgical level of precision. While some criminals were eventually caught, the mystery of the missing millions continues to haunt investigators. And the masterminds, those who truly understood the architecture, the planning, the tunneling, remain the invisible ghosts of the world's most legendary underground heist. The Dunbar armored robbery remains one of the most meticulously executed and financially successful cash thefts in American history. What sets it apart is not just the staggering sum stolen, $18.9 million, but the fact that the mastermind behind it, Alan Pace, was not a criminal outsider. He was an employee, a trusted insider, a man who walked the halls of the armored depot daily, who shook hands with coworkers, who memorized every camera angle, every guard routine, and every structural weakness the facility possessed. To this day, the story of the Dunbar heist stands as proof that the most dangerous threats often come from within. The setup began months before the robbery itself. Alan Pace had been hired as a regional safety inspector for Dunbar Armored, a role that gave him access to nearly every security detail the company had. His job was to ensure that employees were following safety rules, but the position also gave him the authority to go nearly anywhere in the massive Los Angeles cash depot. It didn't take long for him to understand the inner workings of the operation. He knew when the vaults were busiest, when they were quiet, and when the guards took breaks or swapped shifts. He paid attention to the camera placements, even going so far as to time their rotation angles. Most importantly, he learned the layout of the vault itself, a design meant to be impenetrable from the outside but vulnerable to anyone who already had a foot inside. Pace's co-workers would later describe him as quiet, polite, and unassuming. He wasn't the sort of man who looked like he was plotting an elaborate multi-million-dollar theft. But quietly, methodically, and in secret, he was recruiting. He reached out to 5 trusted childhood friends, men who had no direct ties to Dunbar and were willing to take risks for a life-changing payout. Their preparation was extensive. They trained together, rehearsed movements, reviewed building diagrams, and practiced wearing disguises that would conceal their identities even from the depot's internal staff. Pace understood that the greatest heists failed because of one small oversight. He was determined that this one would not. On the night of September 12, 1997, that determination became action. Pace used his key to enter the Dunbar facility after hours under the guise of a personal visit. His insider access allowed him to disable or avoid internal alarms long enough for his accomplices to enter through a side door he discreetly unlocked. The robbery was a model of precision. The crew waited in darkness until the guards returned from a scheduled break, then ambushed them one by one, subduing them with zip ties but avoiding unnecessary violence. Pace had specifically instructed his team not to injure anyone. He knew the guards personally, after all. He simply needed them out of the way. Once the guards were restrained, Pace led the crew into the heart of the depot, the vault where enormous quantities of cash were processed, sorted, and stored. It was here that the true advantage of insider knowledge became undeniable. Pace knew exactly where the largest stacks of untraceable bills were kept, freshly delivered cash that had not yet been logged or marked. Instead of wasting time grabbing whatever they could find, the crew went straight to the jackpots. Together they loaded bags with millions of dollars, moving with the urgency and efficiency of a team rehearsing a choreographed dance. In less than 30 minutes, they had amassed nearly $19 million in cash, the largest cash theft in U.S. history at the time. But stealing the money was only half the challenge. The crew had to get it out of the building without triggering suspicion. They used a truck owned by one of the team members, carefully maneuvering it to the loading dock Pace had previously identified as the least watched. The getaway was clean, silent, and shockingly simple. By the time the first guard managed to free himself and raise the alarm, the robbers were long gone, and Los Angeles authorities were left puzzling over one of the most baffling crime scenes they had ever encountered. For months, investigators could make no sense of the robbery. There were no fingerprints, no security footage that clearly captured the suspects' faces, and no signs of forced entry. The conclusion was unavoidable. Someone on the inside had orchestrated the heist. But proving it was more difficult than suspecting it. Pace was interviewed several times, and though investigators found him suspicious, he had no criminal record, no unusual financial activity, and no obvious motive. He denied involvement, and with no physical evidence to tie him to the scene, authorities had little choice but to let him walk. Meanwhile, Pace and his accomplices began laundering the stolen cash. They moved slowly, carefully avoiding large purchases that might draw attention. They used family and friends to help hide the money, purchased property through intermediaries, and funneled small sums into businesses that would disguise the origins of the funds. The plan might have worked indefinitely if not for a single fatal mistake. One of the accomplices handed a stack of stolen bills to a real estate broker, who noticed that some of the bank straps still bore markings unique to the Dunbar depot. That small detail broke the case open. Once investigators seized that stack of bills, the trail led quickly back to the accomplice, and from there, to Pace himself. When authorities searched Pace's home, they found the original floor plans of the Dunbar facility, blueprints he had stolen during his employment. At that point, the entire scheme unraveled. Each crew member was arrested, tried, and convicted in turn. Pace, identified as the mastermind, received a sentence of 24 years in federal prison. The others received varying sentences based on their involvement. Even with nearly all members apprehended, a shocking truth remains: only a fraction of the stolen money was ever recovered. More than $10 million is still missing to this day, unaccounted for and likely hidden in ways that may never be uncovered. That missing fortune keeps the Dunbar robbery alive in public memory. It is not just a tale of crime, but a cautionary reminder that insider knowledge can dismantle even the strongest security systems. The story of the Great Dunbar armored robbery endures because it reveals the intersection of trust and betrayal, planning and improvisation, brilliance and recklessness. It wasn't a flashy Hollywood-style break-in or a violent showdown. It was, instead, a quiet storm, masterminded by a man who blended into the background until the moment he decided he no longer wanted to. And when that moment came, he pulled off one of the greatest bank heists in American history. The Loomis Fargo vault job of 1997 was one of the most bizarre and darkly comedic heists in American history, a crime that combined audacity, greed, incompetence, and a cast of characters straight out of a small-town drama. It wasn't masterminded by professional thieves, career criminals, or underworld figures. Instead, it was orchestrated by a mild-mannered vault supervisor with no criminal record, a disgruntled former employee, and a handful of small-town acquaintances who treated a multi-million-dollar robbery like a lottery win rather than a covert operation. Their spectacular inability to blend in or keep quiet would make the case an FBI agent's dream. On the night of October 4, 1997, Loomis Fargo employee David Scott Gant reported for work as usual in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was a 27-year-old vault supervisor, responsible, trusted, and known for being quiet and compliant. What no one at Loomis knew was that Gant had grown dissatisfied with his life, tired of living paycheck to paycheck, and increasingly influenced by a former coworker, the charismatic and manipulative Kelly Campbell. Kelly and Gant had worked together at Loomis before she left the job. The two had developed a close relationship, one that hovered somewhere between flirtation and emotional dependency. She had Gant's trust, and once she befriended Steve Chambers, a small-time criminal with big dreams, the seeds of the heist were planted. Chambers, a confident schemer with delusions of grandeur, believed he had discovered a foolproof way to become rich, use Gant's position inside Loomis to steal the vault's weekend funds. The plan was surprisingly simple. Gant would load millions into a Loomis company van, drive away, meet the others, hand off the money, and then flee the country to Mexico. Chambers would send him periodic payments, as long as Gant stayed hidden until the case went cold. Around 6:40 p.m., Gant set the plan in motion. Using his access codes and keys, he stayed after hours under the pretext of catching up on work. One by one, he loaded duffel bags and storage bins with cash, mixed stacks of small bills, bundled bricks of currency, and loose piles of money that had recently arrived for counting. He filled the Loomis company van until it could hold no more, including stacks of money that were so heavy they had to be dragged across the floor. When he was done, the haul weighed well over a ton. The total amount? Over $17 million, making it, at the time, the second largest cash heist in U.S. history. What the robbers didn't realize was that more than half of the cash consisted of low-denomination bills, making it bulky, heavy, and difficult to store or transport discreetly. They discovered this almost immediately when Gant drove to the meeting point in Charlotte and found Chambers and his associates waiting with a single pickup truck and a few plastic containers. The group panicked when they realized just how much money Gant had brought. They had wildly underestimated what $17 million and mostly $20 bills looked like in physical form. After hurried debate, they loaded as much cash as they could fit into Chambers' truck. The rest was left behind in the Loomis van, abandoned in the woods. Not exactly the work of criminal masterminds. But they got enough to constitute one of the largest cash robberies the country had ever seen. Once the money was transferred, Gant took his small cut and fled to Mexico under a fake identity, settling in Playa del Carmen. His plan was to relax, wait for Chambers to send money, and let the others handle the heat back home. But this is where everything began to unravel. Chambers, now sitting on millions of dollars, immediately broke the most fundamental rule of any successful heist: keep a low profile. Instead of blending in, he and his wife Michelle began spending like Hollywood lottery winners. They bought a luxury home in an upscale neighborhood. They purchased a BMW and a minivan in cash. Michelle went on shopping sprees, buying expensive clothing, jewelry, and furniture. Chambers stuffed wads of cash into his ceiling and buried bags of money in his yard. Neighbors started whispering. How had this middle-class couple suddenly become rich overnight? Why were cash purchases happening constantly? Why did they seem to have no jobs but endless money? As suspicious spending continued, the FBI, already investigating the vault heist, received multiple tips pointing to Chambers and his wife. Surveillance of the couple revealed more clues: meetings with Kelly Campbell, erratic behavior, and attempts to deposit or exchange large amounts of cash despite the bill's Loomis banding, a dead giveaway. Meanwhile, in Mexico, Gant quickly ran into a separate issue. Chambers had no intention of paying him. The mastermind decided that Gant was a liability, a loose end who knew too much and could be traced. Instead of wiring funds as promised, Chambers stalled and then discussed having Gant eliminated, though no real plan was actually put into action. Gant, running low on cash and increasingly uneasy, made frequent phone calls to Kelly Campbell, calls that the FBI soon began monitoring. His voice and identity were quickly confirmed. Once they had Gant's location in Mexico, the case accelerated. In March 1998, after months on the run, Gant was arrested without incident at a resort cafe. He was cooperative, polite, and almost relieved. The combination of isolation, fear of Chambers, and dwindling money had worn him down. He provided a full confession and detailed the plan, including Chambers's involvement and the intended profit split. His statements dovetailed with the FBI's evidence. Within days, the authorities raided Chambers's home. Agents found stacks of cash in the attic, in garbage bags, in boxes, and hidden throughout the property. They confiscated vehicles, seized receipts, and linked purchases directly to the stolen bills. Chambers and Kelly Campbell were arrested, along with several accomplices who had helped move or store the money. What made the case particularly startling wasn't just the scale of the theft, it was the cartoon-like incompetence that followed it. The group's total lack of subtlety not only drew suspicion but practically invited investigators to look their way. Rather than creating a smart laundering operation or disguising their wealth, they splurged like characters in a sitcom who had stumbled upon a treasure chest. By the time the case reached court, the government had recovered around 95% of the stolen money, a stunning amount for a robbery of this size. The rest was unaccounted for, likely spent by Chambers or lost during the chaotic transport and storage process. Sentences varied. Gant received about 7.5 years, reflecting his cooperation and the fact that he had not personally profited beyond a small amount. Chambers received over 11 years due to his organizing role and threats against Gant. Kelly Campbell also went to prison, as did other participants. The Loomis Fargo vault job left behind a legacy unlike any other heist. It was a robbery so bold and so ludicrous that it continues to be studied not just for its scale but for its sheer absurdity. In the years since, the story has inspired documentaries, news specials, and even a Hollywood comedy, because the characters seem too exaggerated to be real, yet they are. Despite its goofy appearance, the case also reveals deeper truths: how desperation can push ordinary people into extreme actions, how greed can corrupt judgment beyond recognition, and how money, especially sudden, unexplained money, can expose even the most carefully laid schemes. In the end, the Loomis Fargo heist didn't succeed. It didn't change lives for the better or create lasting wealth. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about ordinary people trying to pull off an extraordinary crime, only to be undone by their own inability to live quietly with what they stole. The evening of December 19, 2004, began like any other winter night in Belfast, quiet, cold, and preparing for the lull that comes just before Christmas. But by the time dawn broke, Northern Ireland had become the site of one of the most audacious, complex, and controversial bank robberies in modern history. More than £26.5 million vanished from the Northern Bank's headquarters in the heart of Belfast. No alarms, no gunfire, no high-speed getaway. Instead, the thieves relied on psychological pressure, forced cooperation, and meticulous planning that left investigators stunned. To this day, the heist remains one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in the United Kingdom. The Northern Bank robbery wasn't just about stealing money. It plunged the region into political tension, exposed cracks in the ongoing peace process, and demonstrated how a coordinated criminal operation could overpower an entire institution without firing a single shot. What unfolded that night was less a bank heist and more a hostage operation with a financial payoff. one that remained shrouded in theories, speculation, and unresolved accusations. To truly understand the magnitude of the robbery, one must first understand the climate of Northern Ireland in 2004. While the Good Friday Agreement had been signed 6 years earlier, ending decades of conflict known as the Troubles, the peace was fragile. Paramilitary groups still existed in various forms, some active, some dormant, and some believed to be seeking alternative sources of funding. The Northern Bank, one of the largest financial institutions in the country, became the unlikely stage for a crime that many claim was linked to those political undercurrents. The heist itself unfolded like a psychological thriller. On December 19th, two Northern Bank executives, Christopher Ward and Kevin McMullen, became the unwitting keys to unlocking a vault containing millions in banknotes. Criminals wearing police-style uniforms appeared at McMullen's home first, presenting themselves as officers responding to an emergency. Once inside, the impostors revealed weapons and took control of the residence. McMullen's wife was kidnapped and held hostage at an undisclosed location. The criminals warned him that any attempt to alert authorities would endanger her life. Meanwhile, another team targeted Ward. They entered his home, held his family hostage, and delivered similar instructions. Both men were forced to act as conduits, employees whose inside access could be exploited. The criminals knew exactly who to target, what their roles were, and how the bank's security procedures operated. Nothing about the operation was chaotic. It was controlled, rehearsed, and executed with military-like precision. On the morning of December 20th, both employees complied with their captor's instructions and went to work as usual. Neither could speak up, either could seek help. Everything depended on their obedience. As evening approached and the bank began to close, Ward was instructed to allow the thieves, disguised once again in security attire, onto the premises. They proceeded to load millions in banknotes into containers and transport them out of the building, blending into the regular flow of night operations at a financial institution. By the time the bank's internal systems flagged the unusual movement of funds, the thieves and hostages had all been released. McMullen's wife was dropped safely near Drumbo. Ward's family was left unharmed. And the thieves had vanished, taking £26.5 million with them. Police and investigators faced a nightmare puzzle. There were no forced entries, no alarms, and no obvious suspects. The operation required extensive planning, intimate knowledge of the bank's internal layout, and high-level intelligence about its employees. Someone knew not just who to target, but when to strike and how to leave no digital footprints behind. Almost immediately, suspicion fell on the Provisional Irish Republican Army, IRA. The scale of the robbery, its sophistication, and the political backdrop led many officials to claim it was the work of a paramilitary group seeking fresh financial resources. The British and Irish governments echoed this theory, creating a political storm that threatened ongoing peace negotiations. The IRA denied involvement entirely, insisting it had no hand in the heist. Despite numerous statements from political leaders and police forces, no concrete evidence was found linking the organization to the crime in a legally actionable way. Even more striking, almost no one was ever convicted for the robbery itself. Though several individuals were arrested in connection with laundering parts of the money, some of it believed to be found in Republica Dominicana and suspicious sums discovered in Belfast homes, no mastermind was ever identified. The money trail dissolved into a maze of cash-based transactions, burned notes, and speculative tips from unreliable sources. Much of the stolen money simply disappeared from the world's financial radar. The Northern Bank robbery created shockwaves that went far beyond the financial world. The bank was forced to recall and redesign all of its banknotes, a massive undertaking that cost millions but ensured the stolen money couldn't easily be spent. Politics became more tense. Trust eroded between negotiating parties. The peace process that had slowly been built over years seemed suddenly fragile again. From a criminal perspective, the robbery continues to be studied for its operational excellence. The thieves relied on coercion rather than brute force. They bypassed cameras, alarms, and guards not through technological genius but through psychological dominance. They exploited human vulnerability in a way that was cold, methodical, and devastatingly effective. As a story, the Northern Bank robbery remains a blend of political suspicion, criminal ingenuity, and unresolved mystery. It's a reminder that the greatest heists don't always involve explosions or dramatic shootouts. Sometimes they unfold quietly, behind closed doors, executed by individuals who understand systems, psychology, and opportunity. 2 decades later, the heist remains unsolved. No mastermind has emerged, no credible confession has surfaced, and no significant portion of the money has been recovered. In Northern Ireland, the robbery continues to linger like a shadow, one part criminal legend, one part political accusation, one part cold case with no clear ending. And perhaps that's why it stands as one of the greatest bank heists in history, because it succeeded not only in taking the money, but in taking the truth with it. On the night of February 21, 2006, the town of Tunbridge in Kent, England, became the backdrop for what would soon be known as the largest cash robbery in British history. The Securitas Depot, a fortified, high-security cash handling center, was the kind of place designed to be impenetrable. It held millions of pounds in banknotes, processed currency for the entire region, and was protected by vaults, armed guards, and modern surveillance systems. To the public, it appeared impossible to breach. But a team of meticulously organized criminals saw it not as a fortress, but as an opportunity. The raid was not a spontaneous act. It was the result of months of surveillance, planning, and deception. One of the early steps involved identifying the weak points in Securitas security protocols, and the criminals quickly discovered that the depot manager, Colin Dixon, was the key. Dixon was responsible for overseeing the movement of cash, had access to the secure areas, and could bypass the digital systems that controlled the vault doors. If they could get to him, they could get to the money. Their strategy began with surveillance. Members of the gang followed Dixon for weeks, observing his routine, noting his commute, and identifying his patterns. Eventually, they executed a crucial part of their plan: impersonation. 2 gang members disguised as police officers, complete with uniforms and authentic-looking equipment, pulled Dixon over while he was driving home from work. The ruse worked perfectly. Believing he was dealing with legitimate law enforcement, Dixon cooperated, only to be handcuffed at gunpoint and forced into a waiting vehicle. The gang's tactics were ruthless and calculated. After capturing Dixon, they drove him to an unknown location where he was bound, threatened, and shown that the gang had also kidnapped his wife and young son. Dixon's family had been taken from their home earlier that evening by other members of the gang, who also posed as police officers. Terrified and unable to resist, Dixon understood that the only way to protect his family was to comply fully with the criminals' demands. With their hostages secured, the gang prepared for the next phase, the infiltration of the depot itself. Blindfolded and in shock, Dixon was forced to accompany them. Though the depot was fortified, its protocols depended heavily on managerial access. Dixon, under duress, was compelled to unlock doors, disable security measures, and escort the criminals deep inside the facility. Employees working in the building at the time were quickly rounded up, bound, and threatened. The heavily armed robbers wore masks and spoke in controlled tones, moving through the depot with precision and confidence. Inside the secure cash storage area were piles of banknotes, tens of millions of pounds in fresh, uncirculated currency. In total, the depot held approximately £53 million that night. The robbers did not waste time. They loaded bundles of cash into large containers, filling them as quickly as possible while keeping the employees subdued. Despite the scale of the operation, the gang avoided unnecessary violence. Their power came from control, intimidation, and speed. One of the remarkable things about the Securitas raid was its efficiency. In under 2 hours, the robbers managed to seize £53 million, though they could only carry away about £53 million due to the limitations of their transport vehicles. This made it the largest cash robbery in British history. Even more shocking was the way they exited, calmly, driving the depot's own lorries filled with stolen money, leaving the staff bound but physically unharmed. The hostages, including Dixon and his family, were eventually released near the town of Tunbridge, left tied up but alive. They alerted authorities immediately, triggering one of the largest police investigations of the decade. Law enforcement scrambled to contain the incident, set up roadblocks, and analyze the CCTV recordings, but the robbers had planned far too well. Their disguises, vehicles, routes, and timing had all been carefully selected to avoid detection. In the days that followed, the heist dominated headlines across the United Kingdom. People were stunned not just by the size of the theft, but by the bold and cinematic nature of the operation itself. The use of fake police officers, the kidnapping of a manager's family, the infiltration of a high-security vault, all elements that seemed pulled from a Hollywood film. Public fascination grew, but so did police determination. Investigators soon uncovered several leads. One of the first breakthroughs came when a vehicle used in the kidnapping was discovered burned in a remote area, along with remnants of police costumes. Surveillance footage also revealed inconsistencies in the robbers' disguises, giving detectives the first clues about their identities. The discovery of a small quantity of the stolen cash in a shed further advanced the case. As police closed in, the criminal operation began to unravel. Several members of the gang were arrested, including some who had attempted to launder the money through local businesses. Others had left trails of evidence, rental agreements for vehicles, mobile phone records, and recorded conversations. Despite the thieves' meticulous planning, small mistakes accumulated. Eventually, the authorities recovered approximately £21 million of the stolen funds, though the majority, over £30 million, was never found and is believed to have been dispersed, laundered, or hidden permanently. One of the suspected masterminds, a man named Lee Murray, a former mixed martial arts fighter, fled to Morocco, where he was later arrested. Morocco refused to extradite him to the United Kingdom but sentenced him to prison under Moroccan law. Several other gang members received long prison terms in UK courts for kidnapping, robbery, and various related offenses. Despite the arrests, the Securitas Depot raid remains surrounded by unanswered questions. The identities of some participants are still unknown, and large portions of the stolen money have never surfaced. The clean execution of the operation, the use of disguises, and the lack of casualties have led many to call it one of the most impressive and audacious robberies ever committed. The raid also triggered significant changes in security protocols across Britain. Cash handling facilities introduced stricter access controls, anti-kidnapping procedures, and enhanced communication systems to reduce the likelihood that a single manager could be coerced into compromising the entire site. Law enforcement agencies also improved their guidelines on identifying fake police officers, as the gang's impersonation tactics had exposed vulnerabilities in civilian awareness. In the years since the robbery, the Securitas Depot raid has become a point of reference for criminal investigations, security training, and academic studies on organized crime. It exemplifies the intersection of planning, coercion, and opportunism. While many bank heists rely on brute force or speed, the Securitas raid relied on psychology, creating fear, controlling information, and manipulating trust. Today, the public still views the raid with a mixture of shock and fascination. It stands alongside the most legendary heists in world history, not only because of the money taken, but because of the methodical precision with which it was executed. And although many of the perpetrators now sit behind bars, the missing millions remain a silent reminder that some parts of this story may never be fully uncovered. When news of the Hatton Garden safe deposit burglary broke in April 2015, the world assumed the criminals behind it were seasoned professionals at the peak of their abilities. Agile, modern, tech-savvy thieves with cutting-edge tools. What emerged over the following months stunned investigators, the public, and even veteran detectives. Britain's most notorious heist of the century had been carried out not by youthful experts, but by a gang of elderly men, some in their 60s and 70s, many of whom were long-retired criminals who had decided to pull off one final job. The audacity, planning, errors, and eventual unraveling of their scheme turned the Hatton Garden heist into one of the most remarkable crime stories in modern history. The job began over the long Easter bank holiday weekend, when the Hatton Garden safe deposit facility in London's jewellery district closed for several days. The burglars took advantage of the quiet streets and minimal security presence. Their plan was stunningly ambitious: break into a high-security underground vault, drill through a concrete wall over half a meter thick, bypass alarms, and loot hundreds of safety deposit boxes. It was the kind of operation that should have required a large team and military-grade equipment. Instead, it was orchestrated by a small group of aging criminals known by their later nickname, the Diamond Geezers. On the night of April 2nd, the men made their way into the building at 88 to 90 Hatton Garden. Many details of their early steps came from CCTV footage later released to the public, showing the burglars arriving with bags, tools, and wheeled bins. Their leader, Brian Reeder, already 76 years old, entered wearing a flat cap, looking more like a pensioner on an evening stroll than the mastermind of the most significant burglary in British history. With him were several longtime criminal associates: John, Kenny, Collins, Terry Perkins, and Daniel Jones, each with their own lengthy record in organized theft and armed robbery. These were not amateurs. They were legends from an era when bank heists were done with grit and cunning rather than high-tech wizardry. Their entry method became one of the most unexpected revelations. Instead of elaborate hacking or modern gadgetry, they simply used a key. Investigators later learned that the group had obtained access to a fire escape door that led down into the building's lift shaft. From there, they disabled the elevator, climbed down, and reached the basement. Once inside the corridor outside the vault, the real work began. The vault wall separating them from the deposit boxes was as formidable as any the men had ever faced. A thick concrete slab reinforced with metal bars, it was specifically engineered to withstand drilling attempts. Yet the Hatton Garden burglars came prepared. They brought a massive industrial drilling tool called a Hilti DD350, capable of cutting through concrete with extraordinary force. Reports later indicated that the drill, costing thousands of pounds, produced an enormous amount of noise, but thanks to the holiday weekend and the building's emptiness, no one heard the long hours of drilling echoing through the basement. By the early hours of April 3rd, they had managed to drill 3 large holes through the wall. Jones was small enough to crawl through the opening. When he dropped into the vault, he found rows of safety deposit boxes belonging to jewelers, businessmen, diamond dealers, and collectors. The group then set about prying open box after box with crowbars, hammers, and grinders. Some boxes gave way easily, others required considerable work. Inside, the burglars discovered diamonds, gold, jewelry, cash, luxury watches, and documents worth millions. They filled bags and containers with whatever valuables they could carry. Yet, despite their planning, not everything went smoothly. They had intended to break open an internal cabinet system known to hold especially valuable items, but they lacked the right tools and couldn't force it open. Frustrated and tired, they decided to abandon that portion of the job. When the alarm system triggered early in the process, it seemed their operation would fail immediately. A security company received a notification and contacted the building's guard service to check the premises. A lone guard arrived, shined a flashlight around the exterior, and declared everything normal without entering the building. That moment of complacency became one of the most significant failures in the entire incident. Had the guard stepped inside, he would have discovered the burglars still at work. After their first session inside the vault, the gang left the building and regrouped. Reeder, the eldest member, left the operation at this point, possibly due to health concerns or disagreements, but the remaining men decided to return the next night to retrieve more goods. This second entry was even riskier, as investigators later confirmed the alarm had been logged and should have prompted a thorough follow-up. Nevertheless, the burglars slipped inside again, completed their looting, and hauled away bins weighted down with millions in stolen jewels. The gang believed they had succeeded brilliantly. In total, they escaped with an estimated £14 million worth of merchandise, though some reports placed the figure even higher. Items never recovered are thought to be worth millions more. They began dividing the spoils, exchanging diamonds for cash, and hiding goods in obscure storage locations around London. But the operation's downfall began almost immediately. Surveillance cameras had captured footage of nearly every movement the group made outside the building. Their meetings in pubs, their planning sessions, their vehicles, all of it had been recorded or observed. The burglars, confident in their old-school experience, had greatly underestimated modern surveillance technology. Many wore no disguises. They behaved casually around public areas. They failed to anticipate just how easily digital evidence could track their routines. London police launched an intensive investigation. When officers began reviewing CCTV footage, they quickly connected the faces of the elderly men to past criminal records. Phone records, vehicle tracking, and informants soon filled in the last gaps. The supposed criminal masterminds had left behind an almost comical trail of evidence. Detectives followed them for weeks, allowing the gang to unknowingly incriminate themselves further as they argued, bragged, and divided property. In May 2015, police moved in, arresting several members of the group in coordinated raids. Jones, Perkins, Collins, and others were taken into custody. Shocked reporters gathered outside courtrooms as the suspects, old, frail, some in wheelchairs, appeared before judges, charged with one of the most spectacular heists in British history. Their ages ranged from 58 to 76, earning them headlines like, "The Grandpa Gang, Bad Grandpas," and "The Old Timers." Despite their age and health conditions, the men were convicted and handed significant prison sentences. Much of the stolen property was never recovered. Rumors persisted that some valuables had been quietly smuggled out of the country or sold through underground networks. Investigators believed that a portion of the loot was still hidden somewhere in England. The Hatton Garden heist became an overnight legend, not because of the sophistication of the crime, but because of the remarkable misalignment between its ambition and those who carried it out. It was an old-world robbery attempted in a modern age, grand in scale, clumsy in execution, daring yet deeply flawed. And in a crime landscape increasingly shaped by cyber-attacks and digital espionage, it stood as one of the last great analog heists, a story of drills, crowbars, concrete, and a group of aging men who refused to let time stop them from chasing one final score. The streets of Baghdad in early 2007 were a tense labyrinth of sand, concrete, and conflict. War had reshaped the cityscape. Security checkpoints, armed convoys, and occasional explosions punctuated daily life. Amid this backdrop, the Dar es Salaam Bank, a modest financial institution in the Al Jadriya district, became the unlikely focal point for one of the most audacious bank robberies in modern Iraqi history. The robbery was not a spur-of-the-moment crime, but a carefully orchestrated operation. The perpetrators, whose identities remain partially obscured by conflicting reports, were believed to be a well-coordinated group familiar with Baghdad's complex terrain. They took advantage of the chaotic post-invasion environment, under-resourced law enforcement, sporadic security protocols, and a city preoccupied with insurgency and sectarian violence. On the morning of the heist, the bank's routine opened as usual. Employees arrived, armed only with pens and calculators, unaware that within hours the institution would become the site of a meticulously executed attack. Security cameras, which might have deterred or recorded intruders elsewhere, were reportedly malfunctioning, creating a critical vulnerability. This detail would later suggest that the perpetrators had conducted prior reconnaissance, or had inside information about the bank's operational weaknesses. The robbers arrived in a convoy of vehicles, blending into the city's traffic, appearing no different from other commuters navigating Baghdad's congested streets. Armed with automatic rifles and grenades, they stormed the bank, their movements synchronized and deliberate. Eyewitnesses described the scene as chaotic yet controlled. Employees and clients were corralled into corners, threats shouted in Arabic, and the robbers moved with precision. The intent was clear, not random violence, but extraction. By the time the first calls for help reached local police, the group had already gained access to the vault. Here, the operation demonstrated both boldness and planning. They bypassed or overpowered the security mechanisms, removing stacks of currency, both Iraqi dinars and US dollars, from safe deposit boxes. According to later reports, the total haul exceeded $282,000, a substantial sum but minor compared to the scale of the operation given the level of risk involved. Surveillance footage later analyzed by investigators revealed the robbers' tactics. They entered and exited in less than 30 minutes, all movements choreographed to minimize exposure. Masked, heavily armed, and moving as a unit, they created an illusion of invulnerability. This speed and cohesion were crucial. In Baghdad, even a brief alarm could escalate rapidly, with armed militias, police, or opportunistic insurgents arriving unpredictably. The robbers had calculated this risk and structured the heist accordingly. Witnesses recalled moments of sheer tension. Bank employees described one robber pointing a weapon at a teller, demanding vault codes, while another controlled the lobby, ensuring no one attempted to call for help. Civilians nearby were warned not to intervene, with the implicit threat of lethal force underscoring the gravity of the situation. Yet remarkably, no fatalities were reported inside the bank, a testament to the robbers' focus on objectives rather than indiscriminate violence. The getaway phase was equally meticulous. The robbers split into 2 or 3 teams, moving through pre-selected routes that leveraged Baghdad's maze of alleys, secondary streets, and river crossings. They avoided main thoroughfares heavily patrolled by security forces and coordinated their timing to avoid overlapping with U.S. military convoys. Reports suggest the use of stolen vehicles, modified for speed and inconspicuity, allowing them to vanish almost instantly into the urban sprawl. In the immediate aftermath, law enforcement faced significant challenges. Baghdad's police forces were under-resourced, their communications fragmented by ongoing military operations and insurgent activity. Forensic analysis was limited, and collecting eyewitness testimony was complicated by the chaotic environment and fear of reprisal. Investigators later concluded that the robbery had likely involved insiders, employees or contractors with detailed knowledge of the bank's layout, routines, and security protocols. This internal advantage allowed the robbers to execute the heist with a level of sophistication rarely seen in the region at that time. The robbery also had broader implications. In a city already destabilized by conflict, such high-profile crimes amplified public anxiety. Citizens questioned the effectiveness of law enforcement, banks reconsidered security protocols, and insurgent groups reportedly monitored the operation for insights into urban targeting. The Dar es Salaam bank robbery became a case study in the vulnerabilities of financial institutions operating under conditions of civil unrest, highlighting how ordinary security measures could be insufficient in extraordinary circumstances. Over the following weeks, a combination of intelligence gathering, neighborhood informants, and military coordination led to the arrest of several suspects, though the precise chain of events remains murky. Conflicting reports emerged. Some claimed the perpetrators had fled across provincial borders, while others suggested portions of the stolen money were laundered through informal banking networks. The case exemplified the difficulties of prosecuting complex criminal operations in a city simultaneously struggling with insurgency, sectarian violence, and administrative instability. The Dar es Salaam bank robbery also revealed the psychology and strategy of criminals operating under extreme conditions. The robbers relied on the environment itself, the backdrop of instability, as a tool. The unpredictability of local security forces, the presence of armed factions, and the sheer chaos of Baghdad's streets were leveraged to minimize risk and maximize reward. By studying this heist, criminologists and security experts highlighted the ways in which criminals adapt not only to institutional vulnerabilities but also to social and political instability. For those inside the bank, the ordeal left lasting psychological impact. Employees recalled the terror of being confronted at gunpoint, the tension of knowing that a single mistake could provoke deadly consequences. Yet, remarkably, the absence of fatalities reinforced the perception that the robbers' objective was wealth rather than bloodshed. For the public, the event became a cautionary tale about security, vigilance, and the unpredictability of crime in conflict zones. The robbery also served as a grim illustration of risk management under duress. Every choice made by the perpetrators, entry point, weapons carried, speed of vault extraction, and escape routes, was calculated to reduce exposure. Similarly, the bank employees' compliance, composure, and focus on survival allowed them to navigate the encounter with minimal harm. This dual perspective underscores a universal principle. In high-stakes confrontations, both victims and perpetrators operate within a web of risk and strategy, where minor decisions can determine life or death, success or failure. In the years since, the Dar es Salaam bank robbery has remained a reference point for studies of urban crime in conflict zones. Security analysts note that even small financial institutions in volatile regions must consider not only technological measures but also environmental and human factors when assessing vulnerability. The heist demonstrated that audacious planning, insider knowledge, and environmental awareness can enable criminals to exploit opportunities otherwise thought secure. Ultimately, the Dar es Salaam bank robbery stands as a stark example of how crime adapts to circumstance, and how ordinary spaces, banks, shops, and offices, can suddenly become arenas of extraordinary risk. It highlights the tension between human ingenuity, vulnerability, and resilience. In Baghdad's fractured landscape, the heist was both a product of and a commentary on the challenges of operating in a city where normal rules of security and order were continually disrupted. The story of the robbery, meticulously planned yet chaotic in its social context, reminds us that criminal enterprises are often shaped as much by their environment as by the individuals executing them. For the Dar es Salaam Bank, the incident became a defining moment in its history, a testament to the intersection of planning, audacity, and circumstance, and a reminder that in conflict zones, even the simplest of institutions can become the stage for extraordinary human drama. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 by coalition forces brought an abrupt collapse to the country's governmental and security institutions. As the military campaign unfolded, one of the most significant episodes of financial plunder in modern history quietly took place: the looting of the Central Bank of Iraq. This was not a street-level robbery carried out by opportunistic criminals, nor a daring heist planned by a shadowy gang. This was a state-directed operation, executed with authority, foresight, and impunity, orchestrated under the directives of Saddam Hussein and his inner circle. The central bank, located in Baghdad's Green Zone, was the heart of Iraq's monetary system, holding billions in cash reserves. As U.S.-led forces approached Baghdad, Hussein's regime understood the inevitability of defeat. The looming collapse of governmental control presented a rare opportunity, securing financial assets before foreign troops could assert authority. Accounts later revealed that hundreds of millions of dollars, in U.S. currency and Iraqi dinars, were transferred under orders from senior officials, funneled into private accounts, and physically removed from bank vaults. Eyewitnesses, including bank employees and government officials, recalled the chaos within the institution. Large armored trucks arrived in the pre-dawn hours, carrying men in military uniforms alongside bank personnel. The operation was swift, systematic, and intimidating. Employees were compelled to cooperate under threat, the implicit understanding being that non-compliance could result in severe consequences. The looting was executed with precision, vaults were emptied, safes were broken open, and currency was loaded onto trucks bound for undisclosed locations. The operation demonstrated a level of organization rarely seen outside state machinery, relying on hierarchy, authority, and coordination. Beyond the immediate physical removal of assets, the operation exploited vulnerabilities in record-keeping and communication. Iraq's central banking system, already weakened by years of sanctions and economic isolation, lacked real-time auditing capabilities. This allowed substantial sums to vanish without immediate detection. Investigators later documented instances where cash shipments were masked as routine interbank transfers, obscuring the scale and direction of the assets. The looting, in essence, was both brazen and methodically hidden, relying on bureaucratic opacity to evade scrutiny. The social and political context amplified the impact. In Baghdad, ordinary citizens were experiencing shortages, power outages, and the escalating threat of insurgency. The looting of the central bank symbolized a state operating above the law, a leadership prioritizing self-enrichment over public welfare. In one account, a bank manager described the scene. "We were instructed to move money as if it were routine, but the urgency and secrecy told us otherwise. Fear was everywhere, fear of the regime, fear of the invasion, fear of what would happen if we resisted." The human element was critical. Individuals within Hussein's inner circle, Trusted aides, military officers, and bank officials facilitated the operation. Loyalty, coercion, and fear intermingled, creating an environment where compliance was non-negotiable. Some bank employees later reported that they were physically threatened or reassigned to supervise operations they did not fully understand, ensuring that no one could later dispute the removal of funds. This orchestrated control exemplified the interplay of authority and intimidation in large-scale, state-sponsored theft. The scale of the operation became evident only months later when coalition forces began auditing Iraq's financial institutions. Reports indicated that up to $1 billion in cash may have been looted in the weeks leading up to Baghdad's fall. While much of the money was traced to accounts within the regime's control or secreted abroad, large portions remained unaccounted for. The central bank looting highlighted the unique challenges of financial accountability during wartime, particularly in authoritarian systems facing external military intervention. Internationally, the operation drew scrutiny, though legal remedies were limited. Unlike conventional bank heists, this was a state-sanctioned appropriation, executed under the guise of governmental authority. Pursuit of restitution would have required prosecuting individuals responsible within a fallen regime, a task complicated by the breakdown of law and order, the dispersal of assets, and the involvement of foreign jurisdictions. Despite investigations, much of the looted wealth remained elusive, a testament to the effectiveness of the operation in both execution and concealment. The central bank looting also underscores the intersection of power, conflict, and finance. Unlike street-level robberies, which rely on speed, force, and deception, state-directed looting leverages authority, control over personnel, and institutional knowledge. The perpetrators were not simply seeking immediate cash. They sought to secure long-term financial leverage in the face of regime collapse. By understanding the internal workings of the bank, exploiting institutional weaknesses, and orchestrating human compliance, Hussein's regime converted the central bank into a source of both wealth and security during the uncertainty of war. For ordinary Iraqis, the implications were devastating. As the regime removed billions, the public faced deteriorating services, a collapsing currency, and an economy destabilized by both conflict and corruption. The looting reflected a broader pattern in which state power can be wielded to extract wealth at the expense of citizens, demonstrating the intersection of crime and governance. It was a stark reminder that theft does not always occur in the shadows. Sometimes, it occurs with the imprimatur of the state itself. In the post-invasion period, investigations by journalists, financial analysts, and international organizations pieced together fragments of the operation. Documents revealed transfers, armored truck logs, and statements from insiders, creating a patchwork understanding of how the looting unfolded. The meticulous nature of the operation, combined with the chaos of Baghdad during the invasion, ensured that complete accountability would remain out of reach. Scholars and criminologists often cite the central bank looting as an example of high-level, politically enabled theft, contrasting sharply with more conventional, violent bank heists elsewhere in the world. The looting also illustrated a broader principle: the methods of theft adapt to context. In peaceful societies, bank robberies rely on speed, weapons, and deception. In conflict zones or authoritarian regimes, theft becomes a function of authority, coercion, and strategic timing. Hussein's regime exploited both the political vacuum and the fear embedded in the system to achieve a goal that ordinary criminals could not replicate: the extraction of massive wealth with minimal direct risk to the perpetrators themselves. Ultimately, the central bank looting of 2003 stands as a unique chapter in the history of bank heists. It was a convergence of war, politics, and finance, a crime executed with official sanction, leveraging the machinery of the state and the fear of individuals to achieve objectives that dwarfed even the most audacious civilian robberies. While much of the money vanished into secrecy, the narrative remains a stark illustration of how human greed, institutional knowledge, and the chaos of conflict can produce acts of theft on an unprecedented scale. The events surrounding the central bank continue to inform studies of financial security, corruption, and the role of state power in wartime. Analysts highlight the looting as a cautionary tale. Even the most secure institutions are vulnerable when authority is weaponized, oversight collapses, and fear suppresses accountability. For historians, the episode is a sobering reminder that the largest heists are sometimes not the work of masked criminals in the shadows, but of those who wield power openly, reshaping systems of wealth and control with near-total impunity. In the early hours of November 26, 1983, a cold London night stretched over the outskirts of Heathrow Airport. The Brinksmat warehouse, a seemingly unremarkable facility storing bullion, cash, and precious metals, stood silent under flickering security lights. Inside, more than 6 tons of gold bullion, along with diamonds and cash, waited in climate-controlled vaults, destined for banks, businesses, and private clients. That night, the warehouse would become the stage for one of the largest and most audacious heists in British history, a crime that would ripple through the world of organized crime, banking, and law enforcement for decades. The plan was precise. A group of 6 armed men, all with prior criminal experience, infiltrated the warehouse posing as security guards. Their knowledge of the facility's operations suggested inside information. They knew the schedule, the layout, and the routines of employees. As the staff inside carried out their late-night duties, the intruders gained control, brandishing weapons and establishing dominance without immediate violence. Their objective was singular: the vault. For the men, speed and coordination were essential. They moved with calculated efficiency, neutralizing any potential resistance while minimizing the risk of alerting the authorities too soon. The employees, confronted with the sudden presence of heavily armed intruders, complied under duress, guided by the implicit understanding that survival depended on cooperation. The robbers quickly accessed the vault, using keys and codes obtained through their network of accomplices. It was not merely brute force, it was a meticulous, premeditated operation that combined strategy, reconnaissance, and intimidation. Inside the vault, the scale of the prize became immediately apparent. Gold bars stacked neatly in pallets, bags of diamonds, and bundles of cash were swiftly loaded onto trolleys. The robbers had prepared in advance, ensuring vehicles and containers were ready to transport the immense haul. The total value of the stolen goods was staggering: £26 million in 1983 currency, equivalent to over £100 million today, making it the largest heist in Britain at the time. The escape was executed with equal precision. Vehicles awaited at predetermined routes that circumvented police patrols and traffic choke points. Surveillance cameras, either bypassed or disabled, failed to capture clear images of the perpetrators. By the time authorities were alerted, the criminals had vanished into London's night, leaving behind stunned employees and an audacious trail of empty vaults. Investigators quickly realized the complexity of the crime. Unlike ordinary bank robberies, this operation involved extensive insider knowledge, coordinated logistics, and foresight about how to manage both the loot and the fallout. Interviews with staff revealed that the robbers displayed a level of confidence suggesting prior experience, their calm yet commanding presence signaling an understanding of both human psychology and operational risk. The heist was as much a study in human behavior as it was a theft of tangible wealth. In the months following, the investigation unfolded into a labyrinth of betrayal, violence, and illicit finance. The gold bullion, too bulky to move easily, had to be melted down or trafficked through complex international networks. Diamonds and cash similarly required laundering, often through offshore accounts or under the guise of legitimate business transactions. The criminals' ability to integrate stolen goods into legitimate markets showcased a level of sophistication rarely seen in conventional thefts. One of the most chilling elements of the aftermath was the violence that permeated the criminal underworld. Several individuals associated with the robbery, or believed to possess knowledge of the loot, were murdered or disappeared mysteriously. These killings reflected the intersection of crime, fear, and retribution, underscoring the deadly stakes involved in handling such immense wealth. The Brinksmat heist was not merely a theft, it was an event that reshaped relationships, hierarchies, and rivalries within London's criminal networks. The financial institutions and insurers affected by the robbery were also deeply impacted. Policies and risk management strategies were re-evaluated, vault security was redesigned, and employee protocols underwent radical change. The heist exposed vulnerabilities in high-value storage facilities and highlighted the need for stringent operational security, not only physical barriers but also strict control over information, access, and personnel. Public fascination with the robbery was immediate. Newspapers ran sensational headlines, television programs dramatized the events, and the heist entered popular culture as a symbol of audacity and criminal ingenuity. Yet, behind the spectacle lay real human and institutional consequences. Law enforcement agencies were embarrassed by the failure to prevent the theft, employees experienced trauma from the armed confrontation, and the broader financial community confronted the reality that even the most secure facilities could be penetrated with careful planning. Over time, portions of the stolen gold were recovered, often through meticulous police work combined with intelligence operations that tracked laundering networks and international transactions. However, much of the loot vanished into shadowy channels, surfacing sporadically in gold markets or in connection with other criminal activities. Investigators speculated that the heist fundamentally altered the landscape of organized crime in Britain, providing a template for subsequent operations that combined insider information, planning, and financial acumen. The human dimension of the crime remained equally compelling. For the robbers, the Brinksmat heist was both a monumental achievement and a source of ongoing peril. The immense wealth brought not only opportunity but also relentless pursuit, mistrust among accomplices, and the constant threat of betrayal. For law enforcement, the heist became a defining case study in criminology, illustrating how ordinary systems, vaults, cameras, personnel, could be systematically outmaneuvered by disciplined, informed, and audacious criminals. Ultimately, the Brinksmat warehouse robbery stands as a hallmark of high-stakes crime, audacious in execution, complex in logistics, and transformative in its consequences. It is remembered not only for the scale of the theft but also for the interplay of human ingenuity, fear, and institutional vulnerability that made it possible. The heist reveals fundamental truths about crime, that meticulous planning, insider knowledge, and adaptive thinking can overcome even the most formidable physical and procedural defenses. The legacy of the Brinksmat robbery continues to resonate. In addition to influencing law enforcement techniques and corporate security practices, it remains a touchstone in popular culture, symbolizing both the allure and peril of criminal ambition. For historians, criminologists, and enthusiasts alike, the heist is a case study in the convergence of wealth, opportunity, and human audacity, demonstrating that the greatest thefts are often as much about strategy and psychology as they are about brute force. Even decades later, the story of the Brinksmat warehouse robbery reminds us that crime is often a reflection of human ingenuity applied to opportunity, and that even the most secure institutions can fall prey to careful planning, boldness, and the calculated risks taken by those willing to challenge both law and convention. The streets of Knightsbridge, London, glistened under the autumn rain in February 1987. Known for luxury shops, embassies, and high-end residences, the neighborhood exuded wealth and sophistication. Behind one of its unassuming facades, however, lay a security deposit facility that would soon be the target of a meticulously planned heist, an operation that would become one of the most audacious bank robberies in British history. The Security Deposit Center was an ordinary-looking building, its interior a labyrinth of vaults, offices, and high-security storage units. Clients included small business owners, wealthy individuals, and corporate accounts, all relying on the facility's reputation for discretion and security. Employees carried out their daily routines with minimal incident, unaware that a carefully orchestrated plan was already in motion to exploit both human and mechanical vulnerabilities. The robbers, believed to be a small, highly disciplined team, had spent months gathering intelligence. They conducted reconnaissance under the guise of delivery personnel and service contractors, noting entry points, employee schedules, alarm systems, and the rotation of security patrols. Their preparation was painstaking. Every lock, keypad, and camera placement was studied, every contingency accounted for. It was this combination of patience, observation, and cunning that set the stage for the operation. On the morning of February 12th, the team executed the first phase of their plan. Disguised as utility workers, they entered the building without raising suspicion. Their appearance alone, a mix of overalls, toolkits, and identification badges, allowed them to bypass initial scrutiny. Inside, they quickly neutralized internal security measures, gaining access to the administrative offices and control panels that governed vault operations. Employees, confronted with the presence of these seemingly legitimate workers, did not initially sense the danger. With access secured, the robbers began the extraction phase. Vaults containing cash, gold, and other valuables were opened using keys and codes obtained through a combination of observation and insider assistance. The scale of the theft was immense, valued at approximately £60 million. It included a mixture of physical currency, precious metals, and jewelry. This was not a simple smash and grab. It was an operation executed with patience, precision, and an understanding of both the human and mechanical systems that protected the facility. The team moved with military-like coordination. Each member had a defined role. Some transported the loot, others monitored employee movements, while one individual oversaw timing and security systems. Threats were implied rather than executed. Violence was not necessary, as the combination of authority, preparation, and intimidation ensured compliance. Employees later recounted a sense of surreal calm. The robbers were methodical, almost clinical in their movements, minimizing panic while maximizing efficiency. By the time the heist was complete, the perpetrators had loaded the stolen assets into prearranged vehicles, ready to vanish into London streets. Escape routes had been meticulously mapped, taking advantage of side streets, garages, and service tunnels that allowed the convoy to bypass main roads where law enforcement might be patrolling. The robbery itself lasted less than an hour, yet the impact reverberated far beyond the immediate scene. Investigators arriving at the facility were immediately confronted with both the audacity of the operation and its operational sophistication. Surveillance footage showed a calculated, deliberate team moving with confidence and coordination, leaving few traces of their passage. There was little sign of forced entry in many areas, suggesting insider knowledge or assistance, a recurring theme in high-value heists. Law enforcement quickly understood that this was not a crime of opportunity but a well-planned, professional operation. The aftermath revealed the complexities of laundering such an extensive haul. Physical assets, particularly gold and high-value jewelry, required careful handling to avoid detection. Investigators traced portions of the stolen property through international networks, often finding it melted down, repurposed, or integrated into legitimate commerce. This movement illustrated the sophisticated criminal networks behind the robbery, capable not only of executing theft but also of transforming stolen assets into usable wealth without attracting attention. The social and psychological impact on the employees was profound. While no lives were lost, the sense of violation and vulnerability lingered. Employees had witnessed firsthand how meticulous planning and knowledge could undermine even the most secure facilities. In the months that followed, security protocols across London were re-evaluated, with other institutions learning lessons from the breach. Insider threat management, surveillance integration, and procedural rigor became the new standards for high-value asset protection. Criminologists later studied the Knightsbridge robbery as an exemplar of risk, planning, and human behavior under stress. The robbers demonstrated how patience and intelligence could replace brute force, using psychological leverage as much as mechanical skill. By understanding employee routines, facility design, and potential blind spots, they executed a theft that remained unmatched in scope for years. It was a reminder that in high-value thefts, human factors often weigh as heavily as physical defenses. Public fascination with the robbery was immediate and enduring. Newspapers ran dramatic headlines detailing the stolen millions, while television programs explored the ingenuity and nerve of the perpetrators. Yet beyond the spectacle lay a sober reality. The heist highlighted vulnerabilities in financial systems, human oversight, and institutional assumptions about security. The event became a case study in both law enforcement training and criminal psychology, illustrating the intersection of opportunity, planning, and human error. The Knightsbridge security deposit robbery also underscores a broader lesson about crime and society. While sensational in its execution, the heist reflected universal themes: preparation and timing, exploitation of routine, and the human tendency to underestimate both audacity and intelligence when masked by familiarity. The robbers understood that institutions often rely on assumptions of trust and order, and they manipulated these assumptions to achieve a goal far beyond the capabilities of impulsive criminals. Even decades later, the robbery resonates as a landmark case. It is remembered not merely for the value of the stolen assets, but for the sophistication, audacity, and strategic mastery exhibited by the perpetrators. The heist became a reference point in criminal history, illustrating how knowledge, patience, and planning can transform even heavily guarded locations into vulnerabilities. Ultimately, the Knightsbridge Security Deposit robbery stands as a testament to the intersection of wealth, human psychology, and criminal ingenuity. The story of that night in 1987 serves as a reminder that even the most secure institutions are only as strong as the assumptions and routines upon which they are built. For law enforcement, financial institutions, and historians, it remains a vivid lesson in both the possibilities of crime and the enduring need for vigilance, foresight, and understanding of human behavior.